My name is Ms. Omawale, and I'm the Program Manager for African American Studies. And today I would like to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Evelyn Simien is an Associate Professor of Political Science and Africana Studies at the University of Connecticut. Dr. Simien has a master's and PhD from Purdue University in Political Science. Her first book, Black Feminist Voices in Politics, examined Black feminist consciousness and its effect on political behavior. Her second book, Gender and Lynching, The Politics of Memory, focused on African American women who suffered racial sexual violence at the hands of lynch mobs in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Today, Dr. Simien will discuss her third book, Historic First, How Symbolic Empowerment Changes U.S. Politics. Dr. Simien has been the recipient of several research awards, grants, fellowships, and service awards. And I really wanted Dr. Simien to come in and talk to us today because a lot of times we have students that are political science majors in African American Studies, and so I wanted you to see a different perspective. A lot of you guys want to go to law school, and so I wanted you to see a different perspective of what you can do with political science, how you can be a scholar, and how your scholarship can be impactful. And so join me in welcoming Dr. Simien.
Welcome and good afternoon. Tell me, do I need this microphone? Do I need this microphone? Can I put it down? Am I loud enough? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stand back a bit. FYI, I am from Lake Charles, Louisiana. So, is there anyone from Lake Charles in the room? Just curious. Or Louisiana? All right, okay. Just so you know, I'm a graduate of Xavier University of Louisiana, a historically black college in New Orleans. After graduating with a degree in political science, I went on to graduate school at Purdue University, where I completed the master's and PhD in 5 years. Like many of you, as a political science major, I had aspirations to become an attorney. And then somewhere during my career, as a political science major, a faculty member pulled me aside and asked me, had I thought about graduate school? I am also a first-generation college student, so my father only went to the 3rd grade. My mother had only gone up to the 8th grade. My mother was domestic, a maid, and my father was in construction. And so he started a business in construction at the age of 27. And his dream, his aspiration was that all of us would go on to receive an education that he, in fact, had never received. So as a tribute to my father, I felt, given that he had received so little formal education, I felt that the onus was on me to pursue the highest level of education, which was the PhD. At the same time, pursuing a PhD meant, unlike my friends, fellow majors who studied law, went on to law school, I'd have a lot more flexible time that was conducive to family, so I wouldn't be obsessed with billable hours and working off the clock and 40 plus, maybe 60 hours a week as an attorney, taking the work home with me. And so I can remember when I received my PhD and visiting one of my friends that went to law school. She was driving this brand new BMW. I was like, oh girl, maybe I made the wrong decision. And she said to me, no, Evelyn, you have a life. You have a life. And the amount of work I take home with me, she said, I don't know how I will make it as partner. And so I say that to say I teach one class a semester, oftentimes at the University of Connecticut. I have a comparable salary to my friends who went to law school. And I cannot begin to tell you how important time is in your own life and the amount of time you can spend with family, friends, and particularly your children during their early developmental years. And so hopefully I might stand before you as another historic first, I admit to you, we're working from a different PowerPoint. So I got some embedded videos, and I had to go into the cloud and grab this PowerPoint presentation. I had done something that was slightly modified. So bear with me as the slides might not segue kind of seamlessly one from the next. So there's some improv on my part here. And so my apologies for the late start. I profusely apologize for the late start. But I do think I have much personality, though I'm 5'1". I've got a kind of large, big personality. And so I'll try to be a little dynamic and sustain your attention for the next 30 or so minutes as we talk about four truly dynamic, amazing people. And we will start with none other than Shirley Chisholm. And I'll just say it straight to you. She is one badass woman. So today's presentation is about my book, Historic First, How Symbolic Empowerment Changes U.S. Politics. It came out in November of 2015 with Oxford University Press. I am currently up for promotion for a full professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Connecticut. If promoted, I will be the only African-American woman in the entire College of Liberal Arts and Sciences to be at the rank of full professor. So when you think historic first, who comes to mind? What moment, what event comes to mind? When we think historic first, we think they are role models. We think they are overachievers. There are people who inspire, who motivate us to be our best selves. There are people we typically look up to. We put them up on a pedestal as larger than life figures, people we aspire to emulate by way of example. As a result, we revere them. We respect them for having beat the odds, for having been triumphant in the face of adversity. We call them trailblazers. We call them torchbearers. They are giants. They motivate and mobilize us. In the world of U.S. politics generally, and the U.S. presidency specifically, I argue that historic first elicit a good feeling emotion, none other than pride, which then becomes a psychological resource like none other that stokes our desire to participate in the electoral process. We vote for the first time. We donate money for the first time. We work a campaign. We put a bumper sticker on our car. We give somebody a ride to the polls. With that said, my goal is and has been to foster a deeper appreciation for the historic candidacies of Shirley Chisholm and Jesse Jackson, yes?
Is there any way you can turn the mic off?
Where's my tech person? I appreciate that.
Yeah, sorry.
If it's annoying, we don't want that.
Yeah.
How's that? Better. Okay. Where was I? With that said, my goal is and always has been to foster a deeper appreciation for the historic candidacies of Shirley Chisholm and Jesse Jackson, who pursued the Democratic nomination for the presidency in 1972 and 1984, respectively. Although Chisholm and Jackson were not successful, I argue their losses were both relevant and meaningful, if not very necessary, so as to create the opportunity for Hillary Clinton and a Barack Obama to take center stage in 2008. At the same time, we must not forget, but remember that Chisholm and Jackson had different performance goals. There's somebody help me with this? All right. At the same time, we must remember remember that Chisholm and Jackson had different performance goals. That was not to secure the Democratic nomination in 72 and 84, but to raise awareness, to use their candidacies as a platform to educate those who historically have been disenfranchised, to take the vote seriously and see it as a powerful mechanism for getting their voices heard. They acted as brokers. The aim was to make the U.S. government responsive to African American voters, and they used the primaries as a radical means to teach, to elevate, to educate the dispossessed, those they represented, that there was power inherent to the vote. They were coming on the heels of a protest movement in the streets, following sit-ins at lunch counters, freedom rides, and a march on Washington, and having secured the 1965 Voting Rights Act. We effectively moved from protests in the streets to electoral politics. We are now in a position to elect people who look like ourselves. So then, as now, black voters could be the margin of victory in determining who that eventual nominee would be. Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. Ultimately determining the outcome of Democratic primaries. The strategy was pro-leverage and successful in keeping their opponents left of center. Again, the idea is that losing can sow the seeds for future victories. The book's central argument, and I'll move forward. The book's central argument and its major contribution is the formulation of this concept, symbolic empowerment, which suggests that historic firsts matter because they politically mobilize new segments of the American polity who historically have been left out. And they involve this segment in ways that exceed mere voting. Individuals who are on the periphery, on the margins, looking in, if at all they were looking at politics in the first place, are now motivated not to just vote, but to donate money, attend a campaign rally, give someone a ride to the polls, and put a bumper sticker on their car, or work a campaign. Our first case is Shirley Chisholm, who began her career as the first black woman elected to the United States Congress, representing the 12th District in New York, Brooklyn. She had long been recognized as a historic first for this reason. But when Shirley Chisholm officially announced her candidacy, friends and colleagues immediately began to question her sanity. "Are you crazy?" they asked. The angst surrounding her decision, however, had more to do with the fact that neither a woman nor an African American had ever held the highest office in the land than it did any legitimate concern for her mental health. And so I share with you her formal announcement. So I'll fast forward.
I stand before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman, and I'm equally proud of that. I am not the candidate of any political bosses or fat cats or special interests. I stand here now without endorsement from many big-name politicians or celebrities or any other kind of prop. I do not intend to offer to you the tired and glib cliches which for too long have been a accepted part of our political life. I am the candidate of the people of America.
And so, fast forward to 2008, and we have Hillary Clinton's concession speech, which, like Chisholm's announcement, made such identity categories as race and gender particularly salient. By focusing on identity, Clinton, like Chisholm, increased the likelihood that such categories of difference would influence our electoral judgments, our evaluation of the candidates, and vote choice in a historic time in this nation's history. This is the very clip that I wanted. Sorry, we can't play this. Oh, God. On YouTube, it's a much longer speech, and this is just the clip itself. In this quote, in this segment, Hillary Clinton says to us that this is a historic moment. Will we move forward or will we move backwards? And actually the quote is in my book, now that I think about it. Will we move forward? She says, the question that was being asked time and time again is this country ready for a black president? And she says, Senator Barack Obama has answered that question. She also asked, this country posed the same question about a female candidate. And she says, this is a critical turning point in the election. Of course, Jesse Jackson's leadership, and I definitely have, you're going to see Jackson. I know that's going to work. I know that was going to work because I got a backup for Jackson. So, of course, Jesse Jackson's leadership on the front lines of the black freedom struggle helped cement his representational ties and affirm his leadership on the main stage of the Democratic apparatus. As Dr. Martin Luther King's successor, Jackson could be both representative and symbolic in two related yet distinct contexts: civil rights and electoral politics. Jackson declared that black votes would not be taken for granted. And this is in the aftermath of the protest phase of the civil rights movement. Both the candidacies of Chisholm and Jackson were considered radical insurgent efforts, which gave prominence to issues that disproportionately affected black America, increased voter registration, and established a cohesive delegate bloc at national party conventions. It's all about the delegates, right? Jackson's rhetoric was designed to engage African American voters, to get them interested, to get them involved, to get them engaged. People who previously had been denied access to the franchise. Jackson's rhetoric, his delivery and style, was in some ways a larger-than-life performance. It transformed the mundane speech into something sublime and made the routine, ordinary election something much more spectacular. So, let me give you just a sample of his rhetoric from the campaign. And I have built it up. I'm going to get out of this.
The 8 Democrats running for the nomination. This time around, you got a chance and you got a choice. You want somebody who marched for you to get the right to vote. You got a choice. You want somebody who challenged corporate America to hire you and give you contracts. You got a choice. It's choice time. All this talk about qualification. What do blacks know about foreign policy? It's an insult. I was 3 years old. I came into my consciousness. My daddy was coming home from the war. Foreign policy. If he was so dumb, how'd he get over there and get back? If he didn't know foreign policy, why'd they give him a gun? And when they gave it to him, he knew which way to shoot. We know foreign policy. When you buy Honda and Toyota, that's foreign policy. Russian vodka, that's foreign policy. Panasonic and Sonny, that's foreign policy. Mercedes-Benz, that's foreign policy. As a matter of fact, we came here on a foreign policy.
I have one more slide, or potentially two. Fast forward once again to 2008. Rather than act as a broker like Chisholm, like Jackson, Barack Obama, much like Hillary Clinton, would emerge as a viable candidate with traditional performance goals, that is to secure the Democratic nomination and to appeal to as many voters as possible. He, unlike Jackson, adopted a representational style and campaign strategy that was deracialized. Obama's speeches would be race neutral and void of protest rhetoric. At the same time, and no less importantly, his campaign would be culturally inclusive. And he organized the very type of rainbow coalition that both Chisholm and Jackson had aspired to lead. Yet a remarkable feature of the Obama campaign, which started out carefully distanced from civil rights veterans like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, was the way in which he eventually made race relevant and exerted a priming influence. If you recall, the question that was being asked time and time again was, is Obama black enough? While memories of the 1960s were often invoked to conceptualize his candidacy and eventually his victory, it was not until April 2008 at a campaign rally in North Carolina that Obama dramatized his blackness by referencing a music video by Jay-Z and using a hand signal to brush the dirt off his shoulder. And so, I have that clip for you. That suggests it's not going to work, so I go my backup.
Yeah, that's why she's only airing negative attacks on TV in Pennsylvania, like most places. Look, I understand that because that's the textbook Washington game. That's how our politics has been taught to be played. That's the lesson that she learned when the Republicans were doing that same thing to her back in the 1990s. So I understand it, and when you're running for the presidency, then you've got to expect it, and you've just got to kind of let it gotta do. That's what you gotta do.
That's what you gotta do. Given that Barack Obama's background lacked many of the cultural markers with which many African Americans were most familiar, such an act became an elevated resource that is an asset to the campaign such that he could reap votes. Such a gesture from, let's say, Hillary would not have been believable on account of her whiteness. So in the book, I talk about representational style. I talk about candidacy as a performative act. I talk about each candidate in terms of their race and their gender. In one context, in the context of politics, it is for Clinton, her whiteness that is an asset in her effort to appeal to white voters and capitalize on this reputational asset of being attached to, at the hip, her husband, former President Bill Clinton. In conclusion, the purpose of the book is to compel us to think about the lasting impact of Shirley Chisholm's candidacy and that of Jesse Jackson, insofar as it paved the way and created the opportunity for these two candidates to be considered viable. If the possibility of securing the Democratic nomination seemed remote, conventional wisdom dictates at the time the expense and risk of a nominating contest makes such a venture less gratifying and not worthwhile for most candidates. The assumption is to be successful is to secure the Democratic nomination, period. However, this logic rests on the assumption that securing the nomination is the only possible benefit. But is it really? It ignores the ability of a primary participant like Chisholm, like Jackson, to act as a broker and advance an agenda on behalf of African Americans and others who historically had been denied the right to vote. The spectacle of their respective performances afforded each the opportunity to acquire experience, prestige, and visibility that neither would have acquired otherwise. As evidenced by Jackson's second run in 1988, he more than doubled his delegate count and significantly increased his electoral base. There is, in my mind, less risk and more opportunity in the presidential primary than conventional wisdom might suggest. To that point, the electoral prospects for Hillary Clinton have significantly improved since 2008. And so I close with Shirley Chisholm as she reflects upon her own candidacy and how she would like to be remembered today. That is, as a catalyst for change, such that the door would be left ajar for future candidates when the society would continue to ask, are we ready yet? Go back.
I want history to remember me, not that I was the first black woman to be elected to the Congress, not as the first black woman to have made a bid for the presidency of the United States, but as a black woman who lived in the 20th century and who dared to be herself. I want to be remembered as a catalyst for change in America.
And now, with that having been said, I will take any questions you have. Thank you.
well. And what exactly is Black feminism?
Oh my God, that's a great question. And I say that because, you know, to write the chapter on Chisholm, I had to go into the archive. So much of her papers, like the best archive on Chisholm is located at Brooklyn College, which is her alma mater. There's a smaller archive at Rutgers University, but it's significantly smaller. And having gone into the archive and just knowing her history, she's a founding member of the National Organization of Women. So in my mind, beyond a shadow of doubt, my answer to that question is yes. Particularly given the fact that she's a founding member of the National Organization of Women and what in fact she stood for throughout the course of her life and her career. But there are many stories I can share about Chisholm with regard to her own activism and her own disenchantment with the women's liberation movement and their reluctance to overtly endorse her candidacy, which is also covered in the book at great length.
And what about Black feminism? Black
Feminism, if I were to define it rather simply, I'm currently teaching a course on Black feminism right now, and in fact their homework assignment that's due Thursday is what do Black feminists believe? To put down a 4x6 index card actually. So they've read the Combahee River Collective's statement, they've read Barbara Smith's work on the 5 myths that divert Black women from their own liberation. And so my head is in the thick of this right now. But if I had to define it very simply,
You don't have to be simple.
well, I could talk all day, so I'm gonna be simple so I can get more questions in. But I typically define Black feminist consciousness as the recognition that African American women face multiple oppressions. Racism, sexism, classism, which largely accounts for their lower socioeconomic status in the socioeconomic hierarchy. But African American women suffer from multiple isms that then compound their experience in politics, in the workforce, at home. And so in my mind, very simply stated, it's a refusal to rank oppressions. Assuming that, you don't wake up today and you're Black, you don't wake up tomorrow and you're a woman, you're these things simultaneously. And so it can't be separated. These identity categories are mutually constitutive. The isms, or they uphold and sustain each other. That's why we call them interlocking systems of oppression. So it's the recognition that African American women are catching hell from all sides on account of race, gender, it can be sexual orientation, disability, you name it. But it's about a power hierarchy. In one context, in the context of the University of Connecticut, I am Dr. and Professor Evelyn Simien. But let me go to the supermarket. I tell this story oftentimes. I have a shirt from my alma mater that says Dr. Simien. Someone sees me in the supermarket, oh, so do you work in Dr. Simien's office? And I was like, no, I am Dr. Simien. So in the context of the university, I might be afforded certain rights and privileges as a member of the Ivory Tower, but outside the campus community, I don't typically resemble your college professor. No one would assume I hold a doctorate. And especially not in political science, where women are grossly underrepresented. It's still a male-dominated discipline. That's my long-winded answer.
Any other questions? I had a question. So where are we with the controversial question, but where are we with your book in the context of this election season? So how do we, where is the African American community in the context of this election season?
That's a great question, because so there's a chapter devoted to each candidacy. The chapter on Clinton focuses on which women. Actually, I'm gonna grab the book real quick.
You gotta pay for that one.
I got my own copy in my bag, but you didn't want to see me mill around my suitcase. One of our own, Hillary Clinton, and the voters who support her. It's a focus on women voters in terms of race and ethnicity and generation. And so it's predictive in this sense. We know that older women across race and ethnicity are most supportive of Clinton's candidacy. So in 2008, I was interested in who among women would report feeling prideful about this woman's candidacy. Interestingly enough, it wasn't white women. It wasn't the very women that she descriptively represents. They were mixed, right? It was Latinas who expressed the greatest level of hope and pride around her candidacy. So the question I pose in that chapter involves looking at pride in relationship to Hillary Clinton's candidacy and which women express feeling most prideful in her candidacy. African American women express a sense of what I call gender affinity. You know, it's a good, warm feeling, but it's not pride. Pride is when you're invested, right? There's something personal about that connection. And so women voters are asked, were you talking about the election? And Latinos are proselytizing. They're talking about the campaign more than any other group of women until it appears Hillary Clinton will not be the eventual nominee. And so the data shows at different intervals, months leading up to the election, Latinas are proselytizing, talking, following the campaign. And all of a sudden, it becomes real to them that Clinton is not going to emerge as the eventual nominee. And all of a sudden, they're reportedly talking about the campaign. It just takes a nosedive. And so I pose the question, does that have something to do with Obama's blackness? You know, I sort of speculate. Does this have anything to do with Obama? It's sort of what we call racial distancing. And so in that chapter, I'm interested in which women support Clinton's candidacy. And I look at women in terms of race, ethnicity, and age cohort. And we do find that, and I say we because I involve my students in my research, so my grad student collaborated and co-authored this chapter with me. And I had an undergrad research assistant that found all the cool quotes. You know, she found photos for me that also worked on the project. And I understand this is Intro to AFAM. And I know this is a sidebar, but I walked into Intro to AFAM and I recruited my undergraduate research assistant from that class. I walked in and said, I'm working on this project. Anyone interested in working on it? And they were paid. Both were paid. And I remember the undergrad assistant said to me, she was getting paid more doing this research than she did working in the dining hall, because that's what she typically did. And so for 2 semesters, she worked on this book, and she's acknowledged in the front of the book for her work and her contribution doing research on all 4 of these candidates. But I think hopefully I answered your question with regard to how does it relate to now.
With this current election season, I'm trying to where's the, when you talk about historic first, right now it's not historic first. So where's the African American vote right now? Where are we sitting right now in the context of this election?
I'll back up and say the black voter has been, since probably prior to actually Obama's election, has been a black female voter. So when we look at Democratic primaries, black women, in fact, have been the largest voting bloc, particularly in deep South states. Now, they ultimately determined who the eventual nominee would be in 2008. Likewise, in this time period, this primary season as well, when it was between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. You do have black women rallying behind Hillary Clinton insofar as voting for her candidacy as opposed to Bernie Sanders. We see what I think the 2008 data tells us, at least I think is predictive in terms of which women rally behind Clinton, particularly with regard to age cohort. Regardless of race and ethnicity, you have older women who are most supportive of Hillary Clinton's campaign. And I think that's true today. Much of the media hype has been around her lack of appeal with a younger female cohort who supported Bernie Sanders' candidacy. So I think in terms of generation, the 2008 data is very predictive of the here and now. With respect to black women, they are no longer having to choose between a black male candidate opposite a white female, who presumably they could feel like there was some kind of way about on account of her class privilege. She could appear to many black women as yet another privileged white woman who has been complicit in the oppression of black women dating back to earlier years as First Lady of Arkansas, let's say. So, does that help?
How is one of your thoughts?
Yes.
Do you think that relates to kind of this election as well, especially with the Democratic primaries? I was reading an article that was saying one of the reasons that Bernie Sanders really struggled with this Democratic primary is because a lot of black voters view him as an old white man who's just here, who kind of contributes to our oppression, versus someone who is really here for us. But then when you look at the history, he's been in the civil rights fight for a very long time. And so it's like there's that perception versus the action. And with Hillary Clinton, especially like if you look back at her history, you can say, well, she hasn't historically, in the past been there for us, but Bernie Sanders has been there for us. But we look at him as that white man versus someone who's been in the fight as well. And so do you think that kind of relates to how black voters really voted in this Democratic primary?
Absolutely. What I think is probably most relevant to the project or the book is the way in which, regardless of time frame, black voters are determining who that eventual nominee is. And their votes translate to the margin of victory. And it forces these candidates to make direct appeals to these constituencies so as to secure the nomination. So once securing the nomination, you have to worry that Clinton will move more to the center versus left of center. So prior to, she's making direct appeals to African American women who take the main stage at the Democratic Party convention, those mothers who have lost their children to violence. And I think that speaks to a Democratic voter who Clinton is well aware she must target in order to secure that nomination. In the same way that even Trump, I was in the airport and Trump is rolling out these policies regarding women's leave, so as to maternity leave and women's work policies to try and appeal to women voters. This is why I talk about politics as a performance. All these candidates have to put on a show, do their own sort of marketing, which is very strategic to target those who will actually cast their ballots and make them victorious on election day.
Do you think that there's a problem with like voters seen as such that we as the people in this class and the majority of youth can tell that politicians put on a show, but it's like, we know they put on a show, but you're still voting for them. Why do you think is the reason for that?
In some ways, we have to hold our politicians accountable. It is the representative from the Black Lives Matter movement that shows up at a Clinton fundraiser, you know, putting Clinton on the spot and is caught on tape and then it goes viral. I think we have to think sort of outside the box